Hi, I'm Len. Welcome to Thrifty Tones, and today I wanted to talk about this guitar. This is the Heartfield Talon. Now, out of all my guitars, this is the one I get asked the most questions about. You take a look at it, it looks a lot like an Ibanez RG, doesn't it? It's not. This is a Fender guitar. This is the only Fender guitar I own, actually. So today, here's a brief history of the Heartfield Talons. From the 1987 NAMM show, when Steve Vai just blew everyone away and introduced the Gem and RG guitars to the world, Ibanez have been on a massive roll. They've taken significant market share away from Fender and Gibson and have established themselves as a real major player in guitar manufacturing. Fender's response had been, well, pretty muted really. In 1988 they'd introduced the HM Strat in an attempt to get sort of shred guitarists back on side, but the guitar hadn't been a huge success. I think it perhaps wasn't enough of a departure from traditional Stratocasters for shred players and metal players, but it was also not traditional enough for your traditional Fender market as well. So Heartfield had been a joint venture between Fender's American and Japanese industries. In the late 80s, they'd actually released a lot of quite unique looking guitars for the Japan only market. However, Heartfield's probably remembered mostly for creating the Talon. The Talons were released in January 1991. The guitars were all built in the same Fujigen Japanese factory alongside the Ibanez models that Fender wanted this guitar to compete directly with. It remains unclear who's designed this instrument. However, given the obvious striking similarities between this and an Ibanez RG or Gem guitar, it does seem likely that in-house designers at Fujigen have probably come up with the Talon's design. All of the Talon models had the same sharp edges of the Ibanez RG, the same basswood bodies, the same 17-inch neck radius, same Goto tuners, similar hardware on the nut, etc. They felt and looked a lot like Ibanez RGs. So the Talon 1 were a lot like this one. They had the same dot inlays, they had Heartfield branded pickups, and they had a Heartfield branded Floyd Rose, although some of the Talon ones did come with Kahler systems. Now this is a Talon 2, okay, a Heartfield Talon 2, and this, I think, when you look across the range, this is when things get really interesting. The guitar came stock with Goto tuners. It came stock with an original made in Germany Floyd Rose, which was a huge selling point. Even today, how many manufactured guitars do we see with German made Floyd Roses on them? It's just not a thing anymore, is it? They had DiMarzio pickups, what Larry DiMarzio would later rename the DiMarzio Super Distortion 3 or the Super 3 in the bridge. And I think Larry described the neck humbucker as being like an early version of the Evolution neck pickup. The single coil in the middle is a US Fender Stratocaster standard pickup. The guitar also came with a unique feature, the TBX control that you find on models like the Eric Clapton Stratocaster was also there, and it enabled the treble to be boosted when you put it up. You can see the USP here from Fender. Sure, the Talon isn't any kind of a departure in terms of design, but in terms of spec, they were really pushing Ibanez, especially on those RG models which came with in-house electronics, by installing DiMarzios as standard, and the TBX control seen as a bit of a sort of exclusive feature on 90s Fenders. It did have quite a wide appeal. Some people have said that Talons are a little bit more like a Jackson neck. I'm not so sure about that. I think this is still very much like a Fujigen 90s Ibanez style neck. It's a little bit rounder perhaps, but I wouldn't say it's as rounded as most of the Japanese Jacksons that I've played. The Talon 3 has the same dot neck but 22 frets. It's got the German made Floyd Rose, but it's the low pro version, so slightly different there, but same pickup configuration. The Talon 4 model was 24 frets, but came with, it was all the same sort of spec, but it came with like shark fin inlays up the neck. And the Talon 5, which is the one I think I look to the most, like the one I would love, it's the same as the 4. It's got the shark fin inlays, but it's got a reverse headstock on it. So cool, such a cool looking guitar. In terms of the logos on the headstock, the branding changed with incredible regularity for a guitar that was really only manufactured for a very short period of time. Some of the necks say Heartfield, some say Fender, some say Talon as the main logo. If you're shopping for used ones, don't worry about fakes in this respect. There are no fake Heartfields essentially. So yeah, these logos change all the time. In terms of differences between a Talon and say an Ibanez RG, the wiring schemes firstly are quite different when you look at the electronics inside them. I found this quite unusual when I looked at it. You know, it's built in the same Fujigen factory next to the RG, next to the Gem, but the switching system is really, really different. The position 1 is the neck pickup, position 2 is sort of the neck and middle. It gives a really different sound to an RG, that, because you've not got an S1 there, you've got a Strat pickup, an American Strat pickup, so it's not quite as sharp as maybe the in-between sounds that the Ibanez guitars produce. The middle position is something I never use on my Ibanez RG, and it can only be described as very odd on the Talon. It's like all of the pickups on together. It sounds absolutely terrible. It's completely useless. And then the other in-between sound, the bridge pickup and the middle pickup is really, really usable. And then of course you've got the bridge pickup in position 5. But yeah, the wiring's slightly different in that middle position. I'm not sure why they did that. It's definitely not a good sound. The TBX control was a unique feature in the 90s, shall we say, to be kind to it. I think it's been taken off quite a lot of guitars over the years. Vinnie Moore, who was the main endorsee of the Talons, he took his off straight away. I followed suit with this Talon too. I found that when I took the TBX control out of the circuit, it was like a blanket was lifted in terms of sound. So while Fender would maybe have pointed to the TBX being a really unique selling feature, I don't think it did much for the guitar personally. In terms of body shape, the Talon's different as well. If I compare it to this Japanese RG, it's kind of a more squashed body. I don't know if you can see from the base to the neck pocket, it's a little bit of a shorter distance. It's not a huge difference in terms of the body shape, but it does mean that the contour on the edge of the body does sort of sit when you're at a different place when you stood up playing. And it feels really good actually. It's really, really comfortable. It's just as comfortable as an Ibanez RG, if not more so, to be honest. The only other difference in the body is there's this weird body contour here, which I suppose is useful if you're doing crazy dive bombs. You can kind of grab the guitar at the bottom, which, sad to admit, I do that quite a bit. Now, in terms of artists who've played Heartfield Talons, there's not a huge roster of players. Vinnie Moore was the big name associated with the guitar when it was released, and his album release coincided with the release in 1991 of the Heartfield Talon. He was the main endorsee. You know, Vinnie was famous for playing in Alice Cooper's band and various other groups, but he wasn't the household name that Ibanez was sort of getting on their roster. Satchel was another notable Heartfield Talon player before the Steel Panther days, and even Buckethead, his second serious guitar, I think his first was a Kramer. If you look through the history of Buckethead, the second main guitar he played was a Heartfield Talon, and he played it for a good number of years as well. So whilst these guys are, you know, serious players, they're not quite the sort of household names that Ibanez had on the roster back in the early 90s, you know, the Satrianis and Steve Vais and things like that. So again, you know, it's another reason perhaps why the Heartfield Talon wasn't quite as successful as what Ibanez were doing. So yeah, this is the bit where we've got to get on to why the Heartfield Talon is like a forgotten classic. You know, why did this guitar fail? This is a Fender instrument, you know, they know how to produce guitars, and it's made in the Fujigem factory. You know, pretty much everything that comes out of there is really, really good. Well, firstly, I think the price was a big issue and a massive mistake on Fender's part. The Talon 2 was around $929 US on release. Now, when you compare that to an RG550, which would have come out at about $750 US new, I just think you're pricing yourself out of the market there. Sure, you've got stock Damasio's, you've got a German Floyd Rose on this, but this is a new player in the market, whereas the RG's been going really strong for years, and so many famous players are using them. Then there's also the branding as well. I mean, the graphics and everything that Heartfield were using, that Fender were using to sell the guitar at the time, even in 1991, I don't think these look cool at all. You know, these strange sort of cartoony graphics of Talons and things like that. Quite cheesy compared to what Ibanez and Jackson and Charvel were doing at the time. And the Talon branding just did not work, I don't think. And as well as that, it's the early 90s. The popularity of grunge is just starting to get a head of steam up, and all those guys are playing Stratocasters, offset, traditional Fenders. You can totally see why Fender lost heart in the Heartfield Talon project. They'd set out to produce a super strat in a market that no longer needed super strats. In 1993, tragically, they pulled the plug on Heartfield guitars. But what we're left with is, for me, an absolute forgotten classic, and I don't say that lightly. This is one of the best guitars that I own. Definitely one of the best guitars I've played as well. It is unique in terms of feel, from the profile of the German Floyd Rose, giving it a slightly different feel to an Ibanez, to the neck, the rosewood on the board, the frets, everything just creates something that's just a little bit unique compared to lots of the Ibanez RG models that you might have played. These are rare. It was only really 1991 that the Talons were produced en masse. So the used market is a difficult thing to get your head around. My advice would be, if you see one at a price that you can afford, it's really worthwhile considering. I think these are absolutely brilliant instruments. So I hope that was interesting. Please give us a like and subscribe. I am considering doing quite a few of these sort of forgotten classic, you know, 90s and 80s shred machine videos. So if that's the sort of content you like, please consider subscribing to the channel. Many thanks.